Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Norwich Talk for another podcast, episode number 33 of our Norwich Talk podcast. We are delighted to be joined by the Revere today, Alfie and Billy. How are you guys?
Good. Very well.
How do you guys plan on feeling post-podcast? Because we are going to talk about Burnley in this one.
Kind of plan on using it as sort of like a counselling session, I think.
Who's the counsellor? Is it my job?
Yeah, I'm hoping it's going to be very therapeutic. I need it.
I think we all do after what we watched. I've got in the notes here some expletives to describe the performance. But on today's agenda, we've got the Burnley game. We've got our big question, which is, have our assets, the value of them, been damaged at all? And we're going to talk a little bit about Manchester City. Not that I really want to, because I said to you guys before the podcast, I've never cared less about a game of football. But we will talk about new signing Jacob Sorensen, who was signed today, who's probably far more interesting than the Manchester City game. But we shall start with the Burnley game. Billy, I'm going to come to you first with a very vague and broad question. What did we make of the game?
I just found it so dull. It was like, there was, I guess there was sort of like 3 real moments of frustration. You know, the 2 red cards and the own goal. Mm-hmm. I had to sort of be persuaded to carry on watching the remainder of the second half, just because we were recording the pod the following day. So I felt like, I was compelled to, but no, it wasn't great. It was dull, it was boring, and I just want this season to be over.
Oh, I really do. Alfie, what did you make of the first 20 minutes from Norwich? Because I actually thought it was fairly decent by our standards. It is important to stress it's by our own standards, but what did you make of that opening 20? Because it was fairly pragmatic.
I think it's kind of been, it's tough for me because since the restart, it seems like every game, it's like a good 15, 20 minutes at the start. I remember Southampton, we were like, we're going to win every last game, and then it's the first 20 is almost fine until they make a change to adjust to how we're playing. And then it's just the back foot the whole time. And that was just exact. I mean, a little less with Burnley because I genuinely think that we almost lost that game ourselves, because if we had 11 men on the pitch, we actually weren't doing too bad. And we even played quite well in the second half with 9 men. It was just our own doing. That was the problem against Burnley. It was almost like we were trying to forfeit the game. That's how it felt.
I think you summed it up beautifully there in terms of the fact that Norwich start games 10 to 15 minute spells of decent football, and then from the rest, it's just shambolic, isn't it? Do you think that has been Norwich's problem, Billy, in terms of other teams just being more reactive than Norwich, or more proactive, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of a major criticism that I think myself and Alfie have had of Norwich City, and maybe more, maybe Daniel Farke in general, to be honest. You talk about the pragmatism that Norwich had, and I think it's interesting because at times, certainly post restart, we've sort of seen that in spells from Norwich, like this use of like a 4-5-1, 4-1-4-1, whatever way you really want to interpret it. But against Burnley at home, is that really like the right time to sort of be utilising that? I mean, I'm not sure. Norwich are quite passive, aren't they? I think Farke last season had a tendency to be able to sort of ride the wave a little bit in terms of opposition momentum, and unfortunately, you can't really do that in the Premier League. I mean, you talk about like us playing with 8 outfield players. The Dyche's teams aren't set up to. Not that anyone's really are, but like they're not a team set up sort of to break a low block. And I think I mentioned the moments of frustration, and Ben Godfrey's own goals, obviously one of them. But it was a bizarre game. But I don't think you can really read too much into that. I mean, like I say, Sean Dyche isn't really going to spend sort of too much time on the training ground, sort of like breaking defensive lines and then a low block, is he? Let's be honest.
You think he put much research into the game? Big game against Norwich City.
I think it's probably like a Bielsa-esque sort of preparation,
Oh, what a strange guy. We've got to look forward to Leeds in the Premier League, which I'm absolutely buzzing for, as you can tell by the look on my face. Guys, right. So there was 2 red cards in the game. I don't know if you remember that at all. And there's 2 of you. So I'll let you pick amongst yourselves which red card you want to take, because they split opinion, don't they?
I'll take the Emmy one because I was actually in the loo for the damage one and I came back. So
I think that's where I'd rather.
He read the group chat.
Yeah.
Right, Billy, do you want to take the lead on Emi Buendia's red card then? Just talk us through it and just talk to us what you think about it.
It was, there's 2 sides of Emi Buendia, isn't there? There's sort of like the angel and the devil, and that was certainly for me that part of him where he lost his head for a moment. And there's 2 sides to the argument. One was saying, when you slow it down, of course it's going to look bad. But I can't really remember a situation where sort of elbowing a player in the back of the neck hasn't been a red card.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I think people are sort of just trying to excuse Buendia. It was just frustration, wasn't it? Really, from Emmy's side. I mean, if you believe the reports, that probably will be the last time you see Emmy Buendia in a Norwich shirt, and I don't think that's how anybody really wanted him to sort of, go off like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not confirmed, but I mean, if you read between the lines, then that probably is what's going to happen. But yeah, it was just a moment of frustration, and that's the side of Emmy that I think, in a weird way, is how he's ended up at Norwich. Because if he didn't have that sort of nasty streak in him, maybe he would be already at that top 6 side. And if he does move on to that next step, then that's an aspect of his game that whoever coach inherits him has got to, coach out of him, because you're not going to get away with that, for a big European side who supposedly he's going to be joining.
Yeah, I remember we spoke to Kieran Scott on this channel, and he said that Buendia had that. There was a bit of doubt because Buendia obviously has that South American fire, and we've seen it there, haven't we? I remember I was on, I think it's Irons United on YouTube, a West Ham YouTube channel, and they were sort of talking about Buendia and sort of fearing him a little bit. And I was like, all you've got to do is wind him up, and he gets himself sent off. We saw it last season against QPR towards the end of the season, didn't we? Where for as much as he was battered and bruised that game, all you had to do was just sort of target him and he'll lash out. And he's done that. And I think most of the frustration has come from the fact that, who was it? Was it Westwood? Ashley Westwood, is that his name? He's just sort of instigated it and encouraged it. And it's a bit like, right, why is he not going as well? Because he's been a bit of a plonker there, isn't he? But I think we can all agree that was definitely a red card. Now, Alfie, Dermoch's red card. Is there any argument against it at all?
No, it's one of those ones where I wasn't. It's one of those kind of situations where you almost kind of expect the player to jump in, like that kind of 50-50. He's almost like lunging towards the ball. It's just reckless. Like I kind of didn't expect it from a player like Dermot, but I kind of, when I watched the commentary on it, it was almost like a complete opposite to Buendia. It actually almost helped him in slow motion because it showed him rolling over the ball and not actually connecting with. I can't remember who it was who went down, but
I can't remember.
There's no excuses for any of them, but yeah, I think, to be honest with you, he was on the Billy Dunn brigade where he wanted Adam Ida starting the last game of the season, so he thought he'd kind of exchange himself in. But
he's one of us. He's one of us.
It was a reckless challenge, and I think for both of them, you can't complain at them at all.
I think the frustration was born out of frustration, as simple as that, really, in terms of the context of Norwich City in general. I think at that point we were just a bit like, what the hell is going on? But yeah, it was a really weird one. Guys, I'm interested to know your thoughts on, I'll turn to Billy first for this, that I was looking at the stats of the game. I wasn't actually aware of this at the time, but we had 42% possession. Remember, Norwich are the home team here. Now, I know the home advantage has sort of disappeared a little bit. Well, a little bit, it has massively. But we had 42% possession, 2 shots on target and 5 shots compared to Burnley's 18 shots and 9 on target. What do you make of that? Is that just, it's just poor from Norwich, isn't it?
It is poor. But I guess you have got a caveat, obviously, with the red cards. But Norwich, even before half time or before the Emmy red card, never really sort of looked like they. I think we can all probably agree that O'Neill's probably the one who always provides that option, even if he's not in the game. Like, he's always going to be an outlet, getting in behind. But yeah, it's not great for Norwich.
Do you know what? I'm very keen. We'll move on from that because that's quite boring, isn't it? We'll move on to something that I found really frustrating, which was the substitutions. Now, we spoke about this on your podcast, didn't we? I think it was sort of Farke's plan B. And now I don't want to sort of delve into that again because that's just a paradox. You get sort of caught in circles there, don't you? I'll turn to you, Alfie. The substitutions that he made, we saw Zimmerman come back. That was great, brilliant. Didn't expect to see him between now and the end of the season. So it's nice to see him come back. I think it'll be big for Norwich next season. Lucas Rupp came on. Adam Ida and Mario Vrancic. Now, what do you make of, I'll pick out of these 4 substitutions, I'll pick Ida and Vrancic. What do you sort of make of Ida coming on with, 4 minutes to go, and Vrancic with, I think it was the 93rd minute, wasn't it? What? Yeah, what? That's my question.
I think that's all you can say, though, is, and I guess that's where some of the frustration comes out of, because it's almost like these changes which are made. I mean, when you're 2-0 down at home and you're pretty much playing like the away side, you're being dominated, you're down to 9 men, and you're making a change like that. It's such just an empty substitution. Like there's no way a player can make an impact in that period of time. They're probably lucky with the way that we were playing in that last 5 minutes that they even get a touch, especially Vrancic. And it's not like you're trying to wind down the clock. So it's been bizarre. But then at the same time, it's kind of always been like that with Farke's substitutions. He's never really done I mean, I know obviously he did that one with Zimmerman early, but that kind of bears a question of was Tim Close even prepared to come out for that second half almost when it was so early on. And saying that, Zimmerman was only cleared to apparently for 45 minutes at max, and he looked fantastic. Like he looked like, and again, it was only 45 minutes with pretty much just crosses to deal with, and he's, quite a dominant defender in the air compared to what we've got. So it was probably comfortable for him to come back to. But he still looked really, really good. It was just, it's like you say, it's just kind of like what is the point? What is that kind of substitution for both of those?
What are your final thoughts on the game then before we move on? Because I'm fed up with Burnley. I just thought we'd have a little chat about it. What are your final thoughts? Is it just another write-off?
I think it's just every game that goes on is more damaging. Like every game that goes on, we just curl up into our kind of a ball even more. And I just can't wait for it to be over. Like I say, I think it's been like that, honestly, since the start of the restart. Like
it reminds me of
the
like,
kind of,
it reminds, like, I'm not really much of a boxing fan, but like, it reminds me of just like a boxer just getting punched and being knocked out on the floor, get back and just like getting punched again. It's just like
it's a bit Wilder Fury, wasn't it? Just Fury is the Premier League and Wilder is Norwich, just getting battered and bruised.
Yeah, I just want it to be over. I want it to be pre-season, even if it's like not going to be much for pre-season. I just want that pre-season syndrome where like you're just getting buzzing for no reason. That's what I want. I miss it.
We'll beat Lowestoft by about 8 goals
Kingsley,
or something.
actually, Kingsley will probably beat us now.
It'll only be 2 or 3 against Kingsley this time. If we lose to Kingsley, I think that might be the turning point for me in Norwich City. Right. So the Burnley game, let's just forget that. It's not an enjoyable experience. Really enjoyed talking about it. I just thought we'd do it because I thought it might be funny, but it really wasn't, was it? We're going to move on to the big question of the podcast, which is, have Norwich City's assets, and when I say assets, I mean Beg Godfrey, Todd Cantwell, Jamal Lewis, Max Aarons, and Emi Buendia, so sort of youth prospects who should bring Norwich a bit of dough. Have they damaged their value this season? Now, the way I intend on going through this with you guys is that we sort of pick a player, look at a couple of stats and sort of say, has he, and what's he worth? And that's sort of the conclusion we'll draw to that. What's their current value? And is that lower than what you would have valued them at the beginning of the season, at some point in the season, whatever. But we'll start with Todd Cantwell, because I think that's a fairly easy one. Billy, I'll come to you first. Has he damaged his value this season?
No, not at all. I mean, Todd's a really interesting case, isn't he? Because he's the one that, in my opinion, has to leave this summer purely due to the contractual reasons. Now, he's got 2 years remaining left on his deal. If Norwich have 2 options, you either sell him or you get him to renew a new contract, and the latter looks unlikely. Sorry. So I think with Todd, it's a case of his value obviously has increased rapidly, but I'd also be wary of playing Todd in the Championship next year, even if I don't feel comfortable with that. He whilst I'm sure he sort of made leaps and bounds during pre-season, I think a lot of it is just he struggles to deal with the physicality in the Championship. And I think the FA Cup game against Preston, if I remember correctly, was really exacerbated that, because he all of a sudden, players they are a lot more physical, but he just seems to have find those pockets of space with more ease in the Premier League. And I think his value has increased. Nobody really expected Todd to have the season he did sort of within the NCFC camp, or fan base, should I say. Everyone else outside seems to think he's always been this player,
Yeah,
but,
that's a bizarre one, isn't it?
Yeah, but obviously we didn't really see that side of Todd last year, and I do wonder if that's because the Premier League is more sort of catered for a skill set, really.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with that. It's hard not to add value onto his current value, because at the beginning of the season he didn't have any, did he? To sort of football beyond Norwich City, because he played last season a couple of times. And sometimes he was scapegoated, whereas this season he's played 36 times, or he's made 36 appearances, 6 goals, 2 assists. Is pretty good for someone who, I think it's his second season in senior football in England, isn't it?
Yeah, it's also helped obviously the teams that he scored those goals against, because I mentioned it in my, I think it might have been my first ever My Football Writer article, and it's like he really comes to light when he's playing against the big boys. And whilst that probably adds value, I think in the long term it does maybe raise some questions of sort of the consistency, and
that's exactly it, the consistency for me.
Yeah, and the thing was with Todd, like I've always felt that it was quite frustrating actually in the Burnley game, because Todd started off in the 10, and that's a role that I really have just been wanting to see him play for so long. So it would have been interesting to see if Emi didn't elbow Ashley Westwood in the neck, how that would have fared. But he's improved in value, increased in value, sorry, hasn't he? And I would expect him to go this summer.
Do you know what you mentioned there that you write for My Football Writer? And I should have said that, shouldn't I? Because we are obviously the YouTube channel of My Football Writer, and you guys are both.
I'm doing the job for you, Ben.
It's not very hard, to be fair. Do you guys both write them?
Not
Alfie's too slack.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, just Billy, make sure you go and read his articles. We'll link one in the description down below if you fancy looking there. But if you don't, that's probably fair enough, isn't it? Right, we'll move on to Ben Godfrey, because as I said, Cantwell's a fairly easy one, isn't he? He has added value. But although it's a very interesting discussion in terms of his consistency, which you can only look at from a Norwich City perspective, because from the outside, he's this guy who scored against Arsenal, Man City. Has he scored against Chelsea? Scored against Chelsea, didn't he? Yeah. Right, Alfie, Ben Godfrey. Probably the most interesting one out of this lot in terms of has he. We've both had Hodge on our podcast, haven't we? And he loves Ben Godfrey. Quite clearly, he professes his love for Ben Godfrey very often, which I think is fair enough and fairly justified. But he's 22 years old, made 29 appearances, and he's kept 4 clean sheets, or he's helped us keep 4 clean sheets. Has he sort of depreciated any value this season?
I think I think if you take it from the start of the season, he's definitely gone up in value, because I think any season in the Premier League at that age to start all of those games is invaluable experience for teams when they want to buy a player. I guess what I'd say is the only downside to Ben is that he's probably had the most media attention, especially recently with the whole kind of thing coming out about, oh, we're demanding 50 million for him. It's never a nice thing to probably have kind of posted about you in the media as well, because that just adds more pressure to him. However, the one thing with Ben is that he's the one player out of all of our assets, which is just, I feel like there's nothing like him in terms of from a British standpoint. There's not a player that can play so competently defensively and also as almost like a DM / centre mid if needed, especially defensively for his like pace and agility as well, and even his distribution at times. I know it's really tough to judge him in this team because, and I've seen a lot of comments about it online as well, you feel almost like if he was paired next to a really good defensive partner, almost like if he swapped with Joe Gomez at Liverpool, I mean, the man would be paying for England week in, week out. And I think his value will, I don't think we're going to get 50 million for him, put it that way. I think would be, and I hope you brought it up earlier. I think that's like you say, it's you take anything below that, but it's just as you're going to get undercut anyway. I would be, and I say disappointed, but I would be disappointed if we didn't at least cash in at 30 as a minimum, or with add-ons going over 30 or exceeding 30. But I think to be realistic, it has definitely damaged his value since the restart, but not since the start of the season.
Do you know what? I think we should bend the question a little bit, not so much for Cantwell, because we've finished with him now in terms of sort of rating his value, and I'll bend it to since the project restart has sort of commenced, have the players have damaged their value. Now, Ben Godfrey, an interesting sort of counter argument for me is that he's very good. Let's not get that wrong. He is very, very good. But my argument, a lot of arguments have been that he is still part of this team, and he's played quite a lot of games in this team, 29 out of the 37 games so far. I know a couple of them were sort of playing through a hernia, which is just sort of mental and a massive credit. But he is still part of this team that's conceded the most goals in the Premier League. Does that depreciate anything at all? Does that mean anything to Ben Godfrey?
It's really tough because I think there's no excusing that a lot of times this season he has been defensively woeful. I think you can't really excuse that. But then at the same time, again, it's defending as a unit, and I think that especially when you consider a lot of our kind of goals that we're conceding at the minute come from set plays, for example. If it was every time Ben Godfrey's man, I'd be kind of sitting here going, yeah, like definitely. But I think it's just defensively as a team and the way we structure, whether that be a back four or whether that be from a set piece, the way we zone or mark. I just feel like it's not just him that's responsible for how we're defending, albeit sometimes I remember the Nathan Redmond goal against Southampton. He just literally dribbled past him straight away and buried it in the corner, and it was really poor from Ben. But I think as a defender, one-on-one most of the time, not many players will get past him. I think he's so fast, he's so agile, and he's so quick on the turn as well that I feel like if you go on him as a one-on-one, I feel like he will be a fantastic defender. But I think right now in the way that we structure up and play, I just think that no matter who's in that position, they will have that same awful record.
I think a big thing with Ben as well is his defensive partner, because last season he formed that partnership with Zimmerman, and they're like opposites, aren't they? Those two, like Zimmerman's maybe hasn't got that pace, but he's got that aerial presence. And Ben, like you say, he's probably the quickest centre half I think I've ever seen play for Norwich, to be honest. But
Absolutely,
he's the more technical one. And the issue Norwich have this season is last season there was this idea that Farke had two categories for a centre back. So he had Ben and Tim Closer, who were the more technical, ball playing, progressive ones, and he had Zimmerman and Hanley, who are going to provide more of an aerial threat. And they haven't had that luxury to be able to use one of those two. Like sometimes they have had to use Ben and Tim since the restart. And what that has resulted in is two ball playing defenders who don't really have that same aerial presence of a Zimmerman. And that's where Norwich's set piece defensive crossing weaknesses have really been exposed, because, Ben wouldn't always usually be the dominant aerial presence in that back four.
I think that sort of relates to the old yin and yang, isn't it? You have your short striker and your tall target man, you play them together. It's sort of been like that for Norwich at the back, isn't it? Which is an incredible point. What are we valuing Ben Godfrey at then? Because I agree with 30 million at the minimum, of which I think Norwich City could actually get that. Are we agreeing on 30 mil?
I'd say 30.
Or settle,
Yeah.
I say settle for rising to 30 million at least.
Yeah, I think if Norwich get more than that's brilliant business. Like Alfie says, the caveat with Ben is just like the paucity of players who are like Ben. Like he's such a one of a kind at the minute, and there really isn't.
Yeah.
Aside from Joe Gomez, but he's not shifting. Like there isn't really an option for any club in the transfer market to buy a player like Ben.
I've got a question that I will ask you at the end of this sort of segment of the podcast, which is who, I'll say two. You can pick 2 out of the 5 players. I think I know one already, but you can pick 2 out of the 5 players to keep. So I want you to think about that, or start thinking about that now. But I think that's everything for Ben Godfrey. We like Ben Godfrey. He's got a lot to learn. When you were talking about him, Alfie, I think I sort of thought youth makes you sort of able to forgive him a bit easier, and a bit more sort of frequently. I think mistakes are expected from him, aren't they? Because he's a young player. He's 22 years old, and this is, his second season at Norwich, and he played half a season before that. I know he played for Shrewsbury, but that's such a sort of different level. And I think it was in a different position as well, wasn't it? He was playing in centre mid there.
Midfield, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. Do you guys want to see that at Norwich? I really don't.
No,
God.
let's not get into that argument.
Thank you. Or do we can if you want, and we can cap it out. We all agree that you should.
Can I just say, like, with all due respect to sort of like the NCFC fans that we follow, like, I must see one of them a day, and it boils my blood. It's so hard to refrain.
I saw one today.
Yeah,
it's now. We can all peacefully agree that he shouldn't be there.
Yes.
Oh, that's
absolutely
nice. We'll clip that up and use that one. Right, okay. Max Aaron's now 20 years old. He is probably my favourite of all these players, which I'll speak a bit about later. 35 appearances, so second most. 4 clean sheets as well. Max Aaron's, just talk to me about him, Billy. Where does he go from here? Has he done anything wrong?
The thing is with Max, like, if we're just like the point we made about Ben about how there being such few players like him, the problem with Max is there's so many players like him. Like there's so many good young English right backs, and at the time, I think it was last season, it sort of felt like he might sort of actually break into that bracket. But obviously we've seen Trent, Reece James, Excel, players like that. Kyle Walker-Peters now at Southampton, so it appears unlikely that anyone's really. I just can't foresee anyone really sort of going out and spending 20-30 million on him. And I do think another season in the Championship probably wouldn't be the worst case for them. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Sam Byron being that player that steps up, but with his injury record, I would be sort of apprehensive to really rely on him to. It almost seems like it's almost be like relying on Louis Thompson playing defensive midfield. I wouldn't really feel too comfortable with that.
Yeah, that's pretty fair enough. Oh, good old, poor Louis. He was a very good player back in the day. We only saw him a handful of times, but he did look like a good player. Although, we sort of spoke about it on your podcast, didn't we? The old Carl Lafferty syndrome, and your best players aren't always playing, are they? The thing with Max Aaron's for me is that you spoke about, Trent, Wan-Bissaka, Reece James as well, and now Kyle Walker-Peters coming onto the scene. They all sort of focus on one thing. Like Trent is really, really, really good at attacking. Obviously, he's got so many assists this season. I think he'll break the all-time record for the most assists from a defender, just in the Premier League in general, because I think that'll be light work for him. And Wan-Bissaka is stupidly good at tackling and stopping. I'm not too sure on Reece James or Kyle Walker-Peters. I can't say I've seen them too often. But for me, where I agree with you that I don't think a team will spend 25-30 million on Max Aaron's is that he can't do either very, very well. He's sort of decent at both. His crossing for me, I'm interested to know your thoughts on this, Alfie. His crossing for me is really quite dodgy. Now, I'd say about 1 in 3 are good crosses, and we can't finish them, so it's sort of irrelevant, to get to the point. But what do you make of Max Aarons in terms of his attributes? What would you pick in terms of his strengths?
I definitely agree with what you're saying about he doesn't really excel massively at kind of one part, and I think in terms of his strengths, I think pace wise, he's obviously extremely quick, and I do think he's good with the ball at his feet as well, which is nice to have. I feel confident that he could knock it around and beat a man.
Yeah,
I feel like his final ball and his delivery is not as necessarily good as sometimes what people think it is, like especially with crosses. It's almost painful when you see him go to the byline because it's not going to go to anyone. Not that we have many players in the box in his defense which are going to win ahead. It's not like we've got Mbakani up top that he can kind of hit out in the box like we used to. But
yeah,
it's almost and I don't want to link it too soon to Jamal Lewis, but it's almost like the same as Jamal Lewis. Like they're two fantastic young players, but as time goes on, it's whether or not they develop and actually get kind of like you say, almost exceed at one level of their game. And right now with both of them, I feel like they're not. I feel like
they're hitting a
is
ceiling.
better. Yeah, I feel like Jamal Lewis probably is. I feel like there's definitely room for improvement for Max because he's 2 years younger than some of these boys. Yeah. He's 20 years old, and it's still fantastic for him that he's got a Golden Boy nomination. Like that's unbelievable. And I don't know if that's true in terms. The stats for it, but he's probably since it's been going one of the only Norwich players to ever get it, if not the only. And like I said, the problem is, and kind of Bill alluded to earlier, is there's such a highly populated area. You've got to really excel at a level of that game to warrant the transfer fees that are being spoken about. And the best kind of scenario for us is probably to keep Max next season, go up to the Premier League and then sell them before the season starts because his price will be flaunted and he may not be still ready to play in that division. He may not be good enough. So that's probably the best case scenario, but you never know. Some of these boys might be chirping in, whether they're to be out straight away. And for some of them, I'd probably say rightfully so. But for Max, I just don't know if it's a bit too soon for him. I'd kind of like to see him with another 2 years under his belt before he makes that step up to like a top 6 club.
Mm-hmm. I do think his ceiling's very, very high, a bit higher than Jamal Lewis's as well. But I think that sort of comes down to age, which you said. Do you know what? I think the conclusion from Max Aarons is that he needs to pick something. Now, if he could be brilliant at both, that'd be brilliant. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. So I think he needs to pick one thing to be really good at, which for me would be attacking. And I think that's more likely to happen. We've seen him, he loves to play really high up the pitch, doesn't he? But I think he sort of needs to pick one or the other, whether that's a choice, whether that's sort of Daniel Farke's job and his sort of coaching team to sort of nudge him one way or the other. Who knows, to be honest with you. Right, okay, chaps, after a small disruption, I think Billy just sort of went, hey, well, he'd had enough by that point, didn't he?
Getting bored, lads, getting bored.
It's the same old every week, isn't it? Right, we'll move on to Jamal Lewis, who, again, I'm pretty sure I've said this for all the players now, is a very interesting case study in terms of, I think he sort of hit a ceiling at Norwich, but we'll get onto that a bit deeper into the chat about him. Bill, I'll turn to you first. Jamal Lewis, 22 years old, the least amount of appearances, so that's 27, but I think that's because he got injured earlier in the season, didn't he? He had a spell where he was injured where Sam Barham came in, most noticeably against Man City, I think it was. And then he obviously got injured. The word injured we'll hear a lot echoed around the Norwich City chamber because it's just haunted us for such a long time. But Jamal Lewis, he's played the longest as well, hasn't he? So he came into Daniel Farke's halfway through his first season, didn't he? So he's probably had the most time to sort of grow and adapt to Daniel Farke's football. What has he done to his value this season and also since the restart?
Well, he's probably the one maybe at the bottom of the pecking order, the value order. I don't really know. But interestingly, he was the one who actually, there was the most speculation sort of linking with him with a sort of a January winter move, wasn't there, to Crystal Palace?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of what he's done for his value, I think, like you say, it's probably gone down. And I don't think, I think the caveat to all this obviously is COVID as well, because we don't really know what the landscape's going to look like. I think in terms of where Lewis goes now, I mean, for me, it makes perfect sense for him to stay another season and get another season of Championship football. You alluded to it there, that he has had the longest. So maybe I don't think we'd expect sort of leaps and bounds from Jamal Lewis, and maybe his ceiling is lower than Max Aarons. But with Sam McCallum coming in, I mean, I don't know what you guys think of this, but I just think Coventry being in the same league as us, in a team that's built around him as this wing back, like, it just makes so much sense for McCallum to carry on developing there, and for Lewis to sort of remain, unless we receive a 20 mil plus bid for Lewis. But that's the ideal situation that I sort of foresee.
Didn't we spend a lot of money on Sam McCallum, by our standards, of course? Didn't we spend?
We did.
3 million or something.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure, but
I think it's what Hodgie said. We'll blame it on Hodgie. I think that's the easiest.
Yeah, but I believe it's installments, as most of Webber's sort of transfers are sort of structured. So I don't think it's like, oh my god, we spent 3 million left back, he's on loan. For me, it just makes sense, because like, if not, you're going to have either Sam or Jamal's value just going like that if one of them sat on the bench. And we've seen from Farker that he doesn't really sort of like double pack those fullback positions. He does like maybe players to just be able to drop into fullback positions. We know that's sort of why Lucas Rupp was recruited. So, I mean, first, yeah.
Is that why?
What, one of a number of many fascinating reasons. So much. But no,
well,
I mean,
I didn't expect that.
But no, yeah, I would expect Lewis to stay unless there is sort of, I mean, there was rumours about him going to Liverpool today. I don't know if there's anything in that, but
I remember reading, this was ages ago, and it was Liverpool were interested in Buendia and Lewis. Whether they still are now, I very much doubt, because you know, Andy Robertson, so that's an odd one, isn't it? But I personally think he's hit a ceiling at Norwich. I think he can progress as a player, but just somewhere else, because it's a bit like Josh Murphy in a sense that he's not getting abuse from the fans, but it's a bit like, you're done here. Go and do it somewhere else. Go and do it in a new environment with a new manager. Because when he gets the ball now, he's out of tricks. When he came into the team early on, what was new to the team was his sort of pace and ability to actually dribble. There wasn't much of that in Farker's first season, was there? Bar James Maddison, there was none of his driving.
Just quickly, do you think, you talked about sort of beating your man there? Who do you think sort of complements him better playing in front of him? Do you think Todd or O'Neill? Because I actually think O'Neill's better, because O'Neill takes that emphasis away of beating your man, and Lewis can sort of sit back a little bit more.
Do you know what? I think it's a really interesting one, that, because I think Ono Hernandez, it must have been last season, he's learned a massive lesson in terms of defending, because there was points at the beginning of last season where Hernandez wouldn't do anything, and it was like, you meant to defend a little bit there, mate. I remember we played West Brom, and it wasn't late in the season, but it was fairly deep into the season, where I think it was from West Brom's goal. It's just Hernandez not closing his man down, and I think that sort of left Lewis isolated, which is where I think Max Aaron's had it good with Buendia, because Buendia would be a bit more defensively disciplined. I'm not going to say he was defensively disciplined, but he'd be more so than Ono Hernandez. But I'd probably say Hernandez, because, as you said, very importantly, he sort of brings that drive and takes the pressure off Lewis. Although at the same time, that is, you know, you need that pressure, because then it drives players on. And I think that's where having a crowd impacts Lewis in a positive way, because he wouldn't be allowed to, I say he wouldn't be allowed, he'd start getting abuse if he started to continue to turn around and play it back, which was my sort of issue. Do you know what I mean?
From a technical perspective, it's really weird with Lewis, because he has this like tendency to like, he's like obviously left-footed, but he like dribbles with his right, and I just don't really understand it. Like, I don't know if it's like a thing where maybe when he was younger he started playing more with his left foot and now sees himself as a left-footed player. But it's a really weird like technique, like dribbling technique to have, to like dribble with your right foot and then like try and pass with your left. But no, his ability to beat his man isn't really there, and I think maybe Max slightly edges him in that department. But I just don't really see anyone coming in with a sufficient bid for him, to be honest. And for that reason, I think he'll probably stay.
I probably agree with that. I'd be inclined to. I just think he's just hit a ceiling. He's just, every time he gets the ball, it's go. And when he beats his man, he turns around and plays it back. And that's my problem.
For sure.
I'm completely with you on that, Ben. I think my biggest frustration with Lewis is the fact that I feel like offensively, he just really doesn't offer much at all. I know it's a bit harsh to say it, because he, was so good last season, but I just feel like every time, like you say, he gets the ball, I'd love to see a pass shot. It's probably like he's playing rugby, going side or back. Like, it doesn't really, the ball doesn't really venture forward with him. And I guess value wise, I don't know if that's what you want to discuss next, but I would take anything, honestly, 15 million or above for him.
Oh, absolutely.
22, getting older. I'd assume he's still homegrown, coming through the Luton ranks and then to Norwich. So I guess he still has that value, but he's not English. But I don't know if that even would add anything else.
But he has the international experience, obviously, which
I was going to say, he's captain,
which is good.
And I think that side hopefully is going to eventually come through, like playing in a more defensively sort of like structured Northern Ireland team. I can't say I watch them too frequently when the international games are on, but I presume that they
do you not switch Northern Ireland on straight away?
I presume they deploy low block. So maybe we'll see that side of his game to come. But I do think it's a little bit premature, lads. He's only 22. Like, surely he's got time to grow a little bit.
Well, I just don't think it's here. That's the thing, because we've seen it before, like the Murphys. I mean, arguably they've gone off and done nothing. Same with Alex Pritchard to an extent, although that one was just quite funny. James Maddison's gone the other way. But I think I think for his sake, it's not like, oh, I'm fed up with him, I want to get rid of him. I think it's just for his sake, he would benefit from a new environment, a sort of a new point to prove, because I do sort of fear that he could become complacent, which I don't know how that works with young players. I don't know how I don't know how their mentality works. I don't know if they do, but I do fear that he could become sort of comfortable in that position. I don't know what you think on that, Alfie.
I feel like the one thing with Lewis, which I guess I'd be interested to see, is how he plays when he gets his confidence back, because I feel like he is someone who's very, very impacted by his, I guess, confidence and mentality in the game.
Absolutely.
Like, he looks like someone where if he tries to go past someone and doesn't get past them, he won't try it again. That's it, you know.
Yeah,
and
that's my problem.
That's my only downside to him, is that if he's almost like damaged goods sometimes, and that's where we kind of talked about it even yesterday on our podcast with Hodgie. What happens when we go next season if, you know, he struggles again? Does it just keep getting worse and worse and worse? And is he almost, like you say, like damaged goods, and it's almost like the end of that kind of road? So it's interesting to see. But I would say 15 mil. I would snap your hand off to get that.
I'm okay with 15. You, Bill?
Yeah, I'll take it.
15. There we go. Right, we've settled on 15 for Jamal Lewis. Right now, my favourite player that I've seen play, not favourite, that's the wrong word. The best player I think I've played with, I've seen play for Norwich is Emi.
I mean, you're wearing your Norwich shirt now, so is there something you're not telling us?
That's something I started on the show. I want to create the false reality that I play for Norwich. Every little boy's dream, isn't it? But
what he's not telling us is he's got shin pads on under that.
Do you know what I might do? You don't know. That's the. I'll leave you guessing on that one. But right, Emi Buendia, he's 23 years old. He's a bit younger than I thought he was, because I always thought he was like 25, 24. I remember he joined Norwich, and I thought he was 23 when he joined Norwich. That explains that. Made 36 appearances this season. He obviously had that spell where, I say that spell, he's had times where he just kept giving the ball away and conceding goals, which I think will contribute towards our final evaluation of his potential price. But he scored 1 goal, which was the other week against Watford, a pretty good goal at that, and 7 assists. Now, I'm desperate to not use the stat, which is he's created the most chances, whatever, because I'm a bit bored of that, to be honest with you. It's a bit like, yeah, what if this, what if that? Football is a game of what if. Being a Norwich City fan, Christ, that is a game of what if, isn't it? And I'm desperate to avoid that. So what are we, I'll turn to you, Alfie. What are we saying about Buendia? What are we saying about Emi?
I think Emi is probably without doubt the most talented player I've ever seen. And that exceeds Wes Hoolahan and even James Maddison this season. I think as a technical player, he is the most gifted. Yeah. I feel like the downsides to his value is that he's not English. I feel that's one thing which is a huge factor. And I think, like Bill said earlier, it's that hot streak that, you know, you never know what Emi's going to turn up. You know, when he wants to play and he's got that fire in his belly for the right reason, that man could win you a game. And I know that, like I said, we don't want to turn to that, and I hate to, but at the same time, like, you can't not look at that stat and be like, if he was in like a top 6 team, or if he was in Leicester, like what Maddison is, and he's got Vardy ahead of him, he's getting, you know, potentially like 15, 20 assists. And that's the difference. Like, I feel like he's been let down in this side this season, but at the same time, he's also let us down and let his teammates down defensively. I think Hodgie alluded to it yesterday. He's let directly from when he's lost the ball, it's 7 or 8 goals that he's directly been responsible for. I mean, it's a shocking stat.
Absolutely shocking.
I remember the one that killed me was Watford at home. We went into that stadium, me and Bill, and we said, we just got to be tight the first 10, 15. What does he do? Lose the ball to Delafeu on the edge of the halfway, 2 minutes, and they scored. And you look at moments like that now and you think, if he just give that back to Godfrey, you know, where does it go? And like you say, it's a game of what ifs, but I think it depends what Emi turns up.
Do you think he owes it to Norwich to stay for another season to get us back into the Premier League? Do you think he owes that to Norwich? That's an interesting question, isn't it, in terms of these players? Because for as good as they are and how much money they could make the club, it's the same club that gave them the opportunity and the platform. Do you think some of these players, specifically Emi Buendia, owe it to the club?
As much as I want to say yes, I still I very much understand the side of the kind of player where you have got a very short career. You have got not so many options to kind of pounce on a move. Like, I mean, they're talking about Atletico Madrid. Like, I love Emi Buendia, but for that man, if he gets the chance to go to where he's from, well, where he's played predominantly of his football, to a Champions League outfit like them, you've got to be silly not to say, look, I'm like, thanks for the opportunity. I think I'd be disappointed if he went up to a Premier League side, because I don't think he justified a move necessarily. Especially after the restart. But I think if you're talking about the kind of untouchables like a top 6 side or a Champions League team, you just kind of got to take what you can for that. But, you know, we'll only see, because it depends where the value comes from. I don't think if we sell him, it will be to an English side.
You mentioned a very interesting word there, untouchable. Billy, do you think Emi Buendia at Norwich City, in regards to the fans, not the management or anyone like that, because we know he's not, we've seen he's not, but there are times in games where I'll see a tweet, I think most noticeably for me, Brighton, oh, Buendia's trying. That really grinds my gears, because he is part of that team who are not playing very well. Do you think he's untouchable at times?
Nah, he's not untouchable. I mean, is he perceived to be untouchable? Yeah, at times. But like, I mean, the thing is with Emi that the issue I've always had is I've always felt he's played out of position. Like, I never really felt he's a right side midfielder. I've always felt it'd be so much better in through the middle, sort of behind the striker. But that's a different sort of matter entirely. But Norwich fans do love him, and I guess, you know, the chance creation stat is wheeled out to oppose any argument sort of against Emi. But I agree with Alfie. I think he I could certainly see him in a Diego Simeone's Atletico Madrid side.
I couldn't, because aren't they like proper defensive, and isn't that just anti Emi Buendia?
Yeah, but like, I would presume they play like a 10 or like a wide player. I know that they use players like Koke and Stowell to sort of play out wide, to sort of more central.
They've got a thing for that, haven't they?
So that could work. And he does have that. He does have that sort of aggressive streak that we all are sort of well aware of following the Burnley games. I could see it, and maybe like Simeone might be the man to get that out of him. But you talk about his errors leading to goals, and I mean, yeah, it's sort of inexcusable. But I do wonder how that would differ if he was in the number 10 position, because then all of a sudden you've sort of got 2 central midfielders behind you. The thing is, when Emi gives the ball away, that Max is sort of like up, you know, sort of has surpassed him, hasn't he? So
yeah, but aren't the positions that he usually lose it in, is that not in the centre? Because that's what he does. He drifts. You look at Watford; it was in the centre, wasn't it? Do you not?
Yeah,
is that not like just the argument against that?
It's inexcusable. I'm just saying, like, how would that differ? Because all of a sudden there's maybe a bit more of a structure around him, and I completely agree that he does like to taper and he does like to sort of roam in those more sort of central positions, but that's an issue Norwich have all over the pitch, isn't it? This sort of movement of players. All of a sudden you lose the ball, which we've done plenty of times this season, and it's Tom Tribal. And I mean, I think there was the Liverpool game, the first game of the season, and the amount of times Tom Tribal sort of was like looking around him, like, is anyone around? Like, is anyone here? And it's an issue in Norwich of, you know, it isn't just about Buendia. I think it's a wider term issue.
What's your sort of view? This is the last thing I'll mention for Emi Buendia. What's your view on the one goal, which was the other week, as I said? Does that depreciate any value for you?
I think it just shows what he can do when he's on his day. Like it's just a piece of brilliance, wasn't it? And like you say, we see that, and then the next week we see the red card. So,
is he worth the game? Because Norwich will accept no less than 30 million. Is Emi Buendia worth the gamble for another team?
Yeah. Because I think he's versatile enough, he's young enough, and he has proved in a very poor Norwich side that he can, I don't want to say it, but create chances and be effective. I think the goal contribution argument is almost like the antithesis of the chance creation, and it's not great. But I don't think Emi Buendia is in the side to score goals. Like, he didn't even really do it that much last season. So I think if I was like an FA, I'd take a gamble on it on Buendia for sure.
Is there not a bit of the Pukki syndrome this season, in that Buendia's first 5 assists were all in the first few weeks of the Premier League season? And if you look at, say, when Pukki's goals began to dry up, which was quite early on, Buendia's got 2 assists between September and this season. Is that not?
You can probably say that for most of Norwich sort of attacking players. I mean, I think Todd's in
Does that not then mean that he isn't worth this money or worth the gamble? Or do we sort of have this perception where we see him, we know him? It's easier for us to judge.
It's quite problematic with Emmy because, like we say, we just don't know what player's going to turn up on, come kickoff. So you could probably look at a host of factors that have influenced Norwich's sort of descent, and I think you obviously can apply that same argument to individual players. But I think we're all Emmy fans, and Alfie mentioned sort of how impressed we've all been by him. I mean, I remember that performance against Wolves. It wasn't one of those performances that statistically stacked up, but you only had to watch that game to just realise like what a player. Like there's times when there's 4 or 5 Wolves players around him, and they were nowhere near.
You say that, but I think wasn't that the game he broke the record for like the most take-ons or something, and it was like 9 for sure. First, like,
I meant more like when a player scores like 4 goals and like what a performance. Like it wasn't one of those. It was just like you watch that. You've only got to watch.
Wasn't an Antonio?
Wow. Yeah.
I got to say that, man.
You had to really say 4 goals there, didn't you, Bill?
That is just that's bad memories, isn't it? I don't appreciate you guys not underselling Buendia with me because I'm desperately trying to give him something to cling on to stay. I'm trying to scare other teams off. That is, I'd love to see him at Norwich next season. I think he'd be a big part of a promotion campaign. Go on, Alf.
I think it's going to be a very specific team to come in for him because I don't think teams will look past his not theatrics, but his I guess that and I think almost without kind of saying it because obviously it's the only club he's been linked to, I genuinely think someone like a Simeone would be the perfect manager for him. And
he's
that's
Argentinian
where,
as well, isn't he?
And that's where I'm almost a little bit kind of I'm kind of not accepting, but I'm aware that is a very likely move for him.
Whoever inherits Buendia has a very similar task to the one that Farke had. Like there's still, it's still the same issue, right? Like, there's a player there, but there's still so many flaws that sort of need to be worked at. And I think it's just on a high level, isn't it? So.
What are you saying about Buendia then? I'm saying 30 to 35 million. I'm capping it at 35 because if we get more than that, then Webber deserves to be just given a pay rise.
I would say the value to me would be, as a Norwich fan and how good he is, 30 to 35, but his realistic value in the market would be about 25.
I think if Norwich get more for him than they did Maddison and sort of break their record transfer incoming fee, I don't really know how to word that, but I think we'd take that.
Yeah, that'd be a difficult task, isn't it? Because I think Maddison was on the back of a scorching season for him. But there we go. That's Emi Buendia, and they are the assets. Now, I'm going to ask you the question. Who are the 2 that you want to hold on to the most? Mine, very simply, are Max Aarons and Ben Godfrey.
Do you want to go first, Bill? Or do you want me to go first?
You go.
You probably should have mentioned a name.
I would say my 2 would be Emi Buendia and Ben Godfrey.
I'd agree with that. But like I've sort of alluded to earlier, I want to see Emmy in the 10 because I think Norwich desperately need a bit more pace and natural width out wide in those wide positions.
Okay, there you go. That's fair enough. Well, I think that's a fairly decent conclusion to reach. Now, we'll move on to... What do you guys want to talk about first? Do we want to finish on Man City, which is we think we'll lose?
Guess we have
to. That's it, isn't it? That's
there we go. That's the Man City preview. But Norwich City did, in fact, sign Jacob Sorensen, which is a fresh face, and we're going to see many of them this transfer window. I do think we'll see many departures as well. Interestingly, you guys have agreed. So I'm putting you on the spot now. You guys have agreed to come on for our review series to discuss who we want to stay, who we want to go, which is probably the one I'm most excited to do because it's just such an interesting thing, isn't it? Going through the entire squad who've played this season and just sort of picking who stays and goes. But a player who is coming in, Jacob Sorensen, how much research have we done into him, Alfie? What we thinking about him?
I'm definitely going to claim I know too much about him, but I guess as a rough gist from what I've seen, because I don't think anyone can really know absolutely everything about, Sorensen. But from what I've seen, as a midfielder, he seems incredibly competent aerially, even though he's 6 foot, which is nice to see because we're not always the biggest, kind of scariest physical team. We don't really like to get dirty kind of and again, and this is without any statistical evidence, but I imagine our aerial kind of duels won and lost would probably favour the loss for the majority.
Well, McLean had won the most at one point, which is
from what I've seen, he's also a fantastic tackler as well, which again, if you're talking about a championship player, like that's two fantastic attributes. And again, I kind of saw briefly, and I guess Bill's probably the best to kind of talk about this, but he has also sat in previously as a centre back, which kind of gives me a little bit of a, I don't know if it's good or bad, but an Amadou vibe where he can kind of cover both. But hopefully he's not our only kind of centre back coverage, because we definitely need to kind of adhere to that area a lot in this kind of transfer window.
Do we think he's the contingency plan to Alex Tettey?
Yeah, I think Norwich for a long time have really required sort of a competent recruit in that number 6 area. It's a position that famously is quite sort of hard to do so. I mean,
that's where your club legends are, aren't they?
Well, you're essentially looking for somebody with that technical ball progression sort of skill set that, like we sort of alluded to. Ideally, you want a bit of physicality because they're sort of your last man screening, but also you need Alex Tettey as well, like the Alex Tettey side of the game. And I think hopefully, Sorensen can be that man. And Norwich have also recruited Melbourne City as well in that department. So it'll be interesting to sort of see how that fares, because I was having a little think earlier, and Norwich are going to go into the start of next season with sort of 5 defensive midfielders. If we had sort of Tom Tribal, Louis Thompson, Tettey, Melbourne City and Sorensen. So it'll be interesting to see sort of who stays and who goes, because it feels like another season that we're entering where we're saying this is sort of the demise of Alex Tettey, but we've said that so many times. So
no doubt we'll be back.
Yeah, no doubt we'll be sat here again sort of in 6 months' time going, oh, we need him.
What I'd definitely say is it wouldn't be a Moneyball-esque kind of philosophy if you don't buy a young Danish player. All you've got to do is look at Brentford and see how well that turns out. And so that's my only kind of that's where all my hype comes from, is that Football Manager taught me, sign young Danish players, they will gain in value.
There's always that one country, isn't there? Brilliant. We love a bit of Football Manager, don't we? You guys have that little special segment, don't you? But Jacob Sorensen, I did actually make a video on him. I should have plugged that a bit earlier. I did the best I could with the tools I was given, which is Google, so it's a pretty decent tool. An interesting thing about him is that he had 11 yellow cards this season, which I think sort of maybe you can infer that he's a bit more aggressive, perhaps. Maybe that's where I got the Alex Tettey idea from, because Tettey, he loves a yellow card, doesn't he? That's probably why he plays for Norwich. He just loves yellow. But I think definitely he would be a bit more aggressive. That's what we need in the middle of the park as well. And I hadn't really considered this idea that despite Sorensen being there, you do need that Tettey who's going to sit a bit further back, which will be interesting to see how sort of Daniel Farke sets up systematically next season. But what's our conclusion about Sorensen? Are we just excited? Are we trusting the recruitment?
Yeah, I'm just excited to see a midfielder coming who's sort of not like with all due respect, like a Mo Leitner or a Vranch or someone. Like, I want someone who's the opposite of that, and it appears that Sorensen is that. So
he's not got to revive his career, is he?
No, like, this is a young player coming in. If it doesn't work out, it's one of them, isn't it? It's sort of like everybody moves on, but Norwich has evidently made this an area that they want to target to improve, because Alex Tettey is going to be his last season. How much importance or how much of a factor he sort of plays next season is yet to be known. But I'm intrigued about this one.
Well, we know I think he won't be able to play. Sorry, go on, Alfie.
Well, I was just going to say, what you got to always remember with anything that we do in the current kind of football kind of philosophy we have, is that every single one of these signings that we make is going to be a humongous gamble. And as much as we can look into it and think, wow, he looks fantastic, the level of what he was playing at to what he is going to be playing, it can easily prove too much for some players. So as much as I absolutely hope it's... So were you gonna say something, Bill?
No, I was just gonna say, like, just a quick question. Like, if I was to say to you, would you take out of Melbourne City and Jacob Sorensen, one of them to be a success and one of them to be sold? Would you sort of take that?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I'll take.
So if one of them works out, if one of them works out, then we're laughing, really, aren't we?
It's a bit of a process of elimination at Norwich with signings, isn't it? It's just something you notice throughout the.
There's always going to be sort of like a Patrick Roberts or a Marcel Franca sort of in there somewhere. It's just interesting.
James
to see
Husband.
Yeah.
Good old Jimmy Husband. We spent, what was it, £3 million, wasn't it, or something like that on Marcel Franca?
Yeah, he was a big investment. Yeah.
I remember thinking he was going to be good, and then I saw him play, and I was like, "Oh, he can't run or head. What's he doing in centre back?" Right. Okay. I think that's everything on Sorensen. Is there anything you want to say about Man City other than the fact we're going to lose?
Help.
I'm just excited. I'm excited, The season's over, and I think that's the excitement for me, is that once that goes, that's it. That's heads. I know it's already like this for them. I think that's the thing. I'm just excited to kind of write this off and say what a horrendous season, what a horrendous year in general. I guess it's not the end of the year, but for a football year.
On the pitch.
Yeah, let's just get it over with and kind of crack on and kind of get into the exciting aspect of playing in a championship again.
Do you think that's going to be like the for the summer holidays when you hear the school bell go at 3 p.m? It's going to be like the full-time whistle. And it's going to be like, oh, guys, it's over. Let's go again next year. Yeah. Right, I think that's everything on Man City. I mean, I had a couple of stats here. They've lost 9 games this season, which I thought was a bit bizarre. Pep Fraudiola, ? Maybe. that is a complete. That is a
brave on a Norwich podcast channel.
Norwich City piping up about 2-time Premier League winning Pep Guardiola. Oh dear, right. Okay, I think that's about everything, isn't it? That was a fairly decent discussion. I enjoyed that quite a lot. I think there's really interesting discussions, a bit further to be had in terms of the assets, because you can talk about them individually until the end of time, and we've got 5 of them at Norwich, and no doubt this time next season, whatever position we find ourselves in, there'll be 5 more at least. That's one thing we can take for granted. What their value will be, who knows? Guys, I don't know who wants to take the lead on this, but where can all the people find you on your socials, etc.?
It's just at the Revere, and I'm sure you'll leave a link down below. You can listen to our podcast on all the major platforms as well. So I'll send you some links, Ben, if you just whack them in the description. That'd be lovely.
Oh, certainly. Right. You also write for MFW, as we mentioned earlier, so make sure you go and check that out.
Just me, not him.
Just Billy. Oh, sorry. He's warming up, mate. He's warming up the old handwriting. Right. Okay, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. We'll see you again at some point in the future, probably in a couple of weeks, I think, actually, for the review, which I very much look forward to. If everyone would like to sort of like the video, subscribe. If you're feeling kind, a massive thank you to everyone that's subscribed lately. By our own standards, there's been a massive sort of uprise in subscriptions, which is really pleasing. There's been a nice bit of interaction as well, because we love to talk about Norwich boys, don't we? That's just what we do. And we plan to do it for some time as well. How that will turn out, who knows? We could be insane by the end of this very, very long journey. But until next time, we'll see you again very, very soon.